Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the discussion. This is episode 309, part two with Master Dan Lowman. If you did not check out the first part, I highly recommend it. That was more on the Kobaton system and his toolage there and teaching and his journey in there. And he did touch upon some of the KI, but there just wasn't enough time to fill in everything. And plus, his showing of his antique weapons. So therefore, which is why we're here tonight for part two. So if you're watching, tell us where you're watching from. Smash that like button, and I'm going to be bringing them up. And definitely stay tuned. I think I hear the weapon demonstration is going to be pretty prolific. So without further ado, here we go. Hey there. All right,
Hey, how's it going?
appreciate you coming back on again. I tried to fit it all in one session that last time, but it just
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's too much. I run my mouth too much. Too much
I did, like I was telling you before, there was the four aspects, the Kobaton, Kiro, your travels over the Philippines, and then your weapon. So I just knew it was gonna be tough,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
and
So I
I've
appreciate you
done
making it
that.
a second time.
Yeah, and I've done that before. Then things get left out, and I just found that I cut it on an hour and a half. Just bring the person back, and it just goes over well. Then when you get everything in there, nothing gets left out.
Yep.
Yep. But we did. So where I'd like to start to tonight is kind of like your travels to the Philippines. Why? I guess when you first started doing it, why? And then do have a couple questions we didn't get to from Elric last time.
Hmm.
So I'll let you take it away as far as when you started going there and why.
Sure. So I think I mentioned this briefly in the last call. Am I getting too much feedback? Can you hear me okay?
Oh no, it's perfect.
Okay. So basically, our friend Jay Ignacio, he created a bladed hand, right? And then we brought him over to DC. Our group kind of helped with DC gathering, and also we brought him to Denver, Colorado, and helped with that. And so it was me. June was part of the group too, so I think it was not too long.
June just
I know, it just pops in, right? Just in time.
what's popping. That guy kills me, man.
Yeah. So we went over there, and that's yes, me, Shelly, and June were the main ones people would know, right? And then we had a couple of students with us, and we went over there, and then JD's kind of passed us around to. We obviously did the obligatory Lanetta thing, but then we went to Negros and trained with a bunch of grandmasters in Negros. So, but most of them were just about everybody that was alive that was in the bladed hand, DVD. We pretty much saw. There's a few that we didn't. And again, most of these people have passed away now. But so it was great because it gave us an opportunity to meet much different people. We ended up training with the KI group like three times or so. We got to go to the Benondo school, so that was awesome. So it wasn't just the Lanetta thing, and that was our main focus. But what was really cool, what I like, when we kind of segue into what it's like to travel in the Philippines, right, is that when you first go, that's a great way to go, is to go like in a camp or a camp scenario. This wasn't a camp scenario, but if you go to camp, everybody's you have a guide basically, and you can kind of go around and get passed around to wherever you need to go, right? And there were some people influential to help us. Jay was a big one when we were in the Manila area, right?
Mm-hmm.
We went to Negros. There was a guy named Max Maon, who's passed away now, who was just an awesome guy. He was a head of his own system, and he just took care of us and passed us around to different grandmasters that were in the Bacolod area. And Bacolod and Hinagaran are like hot spots, we went to Dumaguete too, and we saw some demonstrations while we were in Dumaguete, but Bacolod and Hinagaran was our main focus. But my point in that is that when you first go to the Philippines, you probably should go to a camp, or have some kind of tour kind of set up, and then the next time after that, you'll never want to do the camp again. Because when I go to the Philippines, sometimes I end up teaching at camps, and I don't mind doing it, but it's not fun really. It's not as fun, as if you can just go and train with whoever you want,
Okay.
So much better that way.
So no, okay. So that was the blade hand, and then but you've gone back several times.
Yeah.
Subsequent to that.
Yeah. So I before COVID happened, I was going about 2 or 3 times a year, and just training with different people. And last time I was just there in May and June, I was there, training, and as well, I didn't get a chance. I go there for work sometimes too. I do IT, right? So, sometimes it's work related, sometimes it's not. It just depends on what I can balance with that.
Sure.
So I get it. I try to meet with whoever. Anthony, who's in Laguna Systems, he's a really good friend of mine. He was supposed to take me to Pate, but I couldn't make it to Pate this time around. It was too busy.
Wow. So, all right. So, so when you go there, what is your priority? Is your priority to get exposure to different things, or to stay in the lane that you're in, or a little of both?
A little bit of both. Right now is to refine what I already know. Right. So, because Combatan comes from the Negros area, I'm really interested in the Negros styles, like some of the different, different footworks from that region, different, Espaladaga systems or different systems in general, from that region. And then I think when I'm in Manila, mainly my focus is in KI, right? Because that's what interests me the most. So I'd say those two things are the things that I focus on now. Before it's getting experience. Like, when we were there the first couple of times, it was, we got to meet Bert Labanega. I mentioned that last time before. He's a big LSI guy, right? A lightning scientific guy. And just, you go there, you take a day class with him, or whatever, you spend, a few hours with him. You're not going to learn really a whole lot, right? Because it's more like a seminar setting, but you get to touch hands with them and you kind of get exposure, and you get a different appreciation when you're in the Philippines than in the States. The martial arts in the States it's just like a smorgasbord, right? It's like too much sometimes, and if you go to the Philippines, a lot of the systems are very simplistic, because they have to be simplistic, right? Because there's no need to make it flowery, right? So, the systems are very, very simple. They may have only like a few different moves, and that's their main thing, their main stick. They may not have a double stick system. They may not have an Espadadaga system. They may have just be a single bolo system, or a baston system. They may not have, just different things, different aspects to it.
So it's interesting. In your opinion, in the general sense, not with specific context to any particular system, do you think when it came to the West, they started to flower, and the ones that maybe perhaps didn't kind of stayed smaller?
You mean in the like the Western countries like Europe and America, or?
Correct.
Yeah, I think it's like typical. It happens to every martial art, I think, in general, right? People they get bored really easily, right?
That's what I mean. It just seems like I've heard this before. What started over there came over here, and it's like it just.
Yeah. It's not unusual to hear stories like, you go to one grandmaster, and you go to him maybe one time, and you go, "Hey, do you have an Espadadaga system?" And he'll say, which is sword and dagger system. He'll go, "No, I don't have one." And you come back 5 years later, and he has one. Or they didn't have a double stick system. Now they have a double stick system, right? Because it's something that they because foreigners come over and they ask for it, and of course
they're like, "Hey, I think we better jump on this."
Well, it's just natural because they're trying to make money off of it too.
Yeah.
So because they're trying to support their family.
No, and I definitely understand that. I mean, why they would want to maybe look outside of their current lens and add more for financial reasons. I mean, definitely. Mm-hmm. When you go there, you've been there now a few times, so sounds like you're able to facilitate, navigate where you got to go.
Yeah.
Is it difficult for a newbie to go over there without being associated with a camp?
You kind of got to know some people, right? So, and it's not that it's unsafe. Most places aren't really unsafe. It's like anything, any place. If you go to New York and be an idiot, you're going to get yourself in trouble, right? But but when you go there, it helps if you know somebody. And that's the really cool thing about the FMA community in general. If you can start making contacts with people in Messenger or start chatting with them, a lot of these people will gladly, help you out and show you around. When we went right before COVID hit, me and one of my black belts, Caleb, we went to Mindanao. And we saw Vico, and we stayed at Vico's place in Buginan, right? And it was just it was an awesome experience. And one, just a great, he's a great host and he's a great person in general. But if you ask most Filipinos, they'll say, "Oh, why are you going to Mindanao? It's a dangerous place." And
that's what you hear. Like when I first started doing this show, it was like,
I'm talking to people. I know, and there are certainly places like that, but Mindanao's probably I think it's the largest island in the Philippines. So you can't really go make blanket statements saying that the whole island is is dangerous, right? There's certainly places there, that are like that you would definitely want to be, careful with. That's if you were to go to a place like that, you definitely want a guide, but if you go to a place like Negros, and you go to Cebu, they're pretty much used to tourists.
So they're fine. Okay.
Yeah, pretty fine. Yeah, I think the hardest part is knowing how to approach the teachers. Like
how to okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming you get there, you have to fly into Manila. So if you want to go south, what do? Take a smaller plane?
Yeah, a smaller plane typically. It's like 45-minute ride to Negros or whatever. You can island hop pretty much.
Is that the best way to do it? Or
because you want to boat would take you forever. You could take boat too, but it would take you forever, right? So the easiest way to do it is just you can fly to different parts of the island. Negros is a fairly good sized island too. So I think we went there one time, went to Dumaguete, and then we took I think it was like a 6-hour bus ride, down to Bacolod. So these islands are pretty good size.
Have your latter trips been more, not so much focused on seeing what you haven't seen, but more or less, like you mentioned, refining with KI?
Yeah, refining with KI because it's easy for me because I'm right there in Manila the most of the time. It's a little harder for me to get now outside Manila, but I still do. There's
we gotta, before we can get to Elric and all that, here we can squeeze this one in. This is from that play. What do you think the biggest challenge in learning KI initially and then currently?
Trying to think back when we were there. Yeah, I think obviously it's different, right? You got to loosen up a little bit. It's like learning any new style. But I think because of Shelley and some of our other teachers, we were kind of comfortable with some of the aspects of KI already. So I think they were actually surprised. Made a couple of comments, and I don't want to sound boastful or anything like that at all, but they made a couple of comments, said, have you guys ever done this before? Because you guys are picking up really quick, and we were, and it wasn't. I think the biggest challenge is getting the ranging down, and then getting the understanding what block goes where, because it's subtle things. So you can have 3 different types of blocks for similar angles. And it's knowing when to do a fraile, when to do a florete, when to do a cruzada, and it all depends on the angle that comes. I think that's the most challenging, for when you start getting into the medium range.
Yeah, I would definitely piggyback off what you just said, just from my experience. I'm the lead senior of all you guys, and I make that clear. I make that really known. This is why I like to have you guys on, because I'm a student at heart. But like when you mentioned that, depending the trajectory coming at you, where you are in place of that, it's going to dictate like what you choose to do. And I'll be the first one to admit, sometimes my choices are not like the quote unquote the best thing to do.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard because different teachers remember it differently, right? So there's some KI has this broad depth. The Ricketts side is going to be different from the Diego side, right? And they're going to have different influences. They're going to be similar, right? But they're going to have different ways they do things, right? And they're going to have different drills. And even with the drills, I'm sure they've changed. In fact, I know they've changed over time, right? So how one teacher, you're working with one teacher and he may remember the drill this way, and you go back to Arnold and he goes, no, we're doing it this way now, right? And that's not a challenge or anything because the concepts are still there. It's still the underlying concept's still there, but it's trying to remember some of these drills. And if you don't have a partner, it's almost impossible to learn this. You can learn part of this online. You can certainly, like Arnold will give online classes. So if you guys ever need online classes, Arnold does those, right? And you can pick up certain things online, but you've got to touch hands. You've got to feel what it feels like when somebody's attacking you for real. So you can practice your range, and even the type of weapon that you're using, right? So people use ABS or the plastic, and those are good, but they don't quite have the right weight, but they have the right size. But then with the metal, a lot of times in Luneta, they're not really in Luneta anymore. They're in a different park, is where they're practicing at right now, because Luneta is closed because of the COVID. They've closed part of
Oh, okay.
that part where they were training at. But anyway, just the metal. Now they're using machetes, which aren't quite the right length, but they're giving the feedback because the metal's there. And
Of the edge
yeah.
and okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of tools to use with that. So I don't know. I think the hardest part is finding somebody to train with.
You know what though, you're so right in that, because like I was like when Mark Wiley came out for his book, I couldn't find anybody. I was trying to chase around Mark Wiley through publishing, and that worked out to be like zero, you know, zero. I just didn't get anywhere. And but totally, like, it just getting with Vico, who I'm going to be seeing soon.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, somebody that can, we got no one from, what's the most challenging part in teaching KI in the Western Hemisphere?
Finding people that are serious about the training, and then just taking the time to teach that one person, right? Because for me, Jim's teaching the same way. He's in Blunchwalk, he's doing Kombatan as well. He does KI as well. So it's one of those things where, you split it all up. So I don't like to, it's hard to mix Kombatan and KI, just like it's hard to mix any art. If you're trying to teach a student two different arts, it's just hard to do, right? So I have to kind of take one student and take them as close as I can, or into KI. I mentioned last time that if you're in Kombatan and you learn Kombatan, you learn it well enough, and you transition to KI, it's a little easier transition versus somebody that's doing KI and trying to transition to the Kombatan.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean like give up one art and go to the other art. That means that you're transitioning to learn that other art, right? Because Kombatan is such a good base art, and it has some aspects of sword and the way we teach it in particular, I guess. That's a blanket statement, but that's the way we teach it. It's easier transition. And I think that's why what they saw when they first saw us in Lynetta too, all those years ago, is they saw we were able to transition pretty easily. We could do a lot of the things because it was comfortable to us. It's because of the way we were taught.
Okay. So with taking, your training in Kiro, when you go over there, and when you visit and all that, one of Alex's first question is, what do the trips over there, when you go there, what do they provide that you feel you couldn't get here?
I think the drills, like from Arnold, right, in particular, right, is Arnold's going to clean up everything, right? So I need somebody to clean up. When Arnold's not here, I turn to Alex Ursha a lot, right? And I mentioned Alex Ursha a whole bunch in the last thing. I didn't realize how much I said his name, but he's just a real close friend, and he's been doing KI for a long, long time too, right? And he's great. I bring him to my home, and he cleans up a lot of things. I'll spend a week with him, whatever, and he'll do seminars at my place. So that's great. But other than that, they used to have Boss Day up north, but I don't have it. I don't see him as much, obviously, right? And because of timing and everything else. But when I go back to the Philippines, Arnold's the source right now. He's a source for this lineage. He's not the senior of the lineage, but he's the source of teaching that lineage, and he knows the drills inside and out. So I can pick up the new drills, that he's trying to do, or refine and say, okay, I screwed that drill up. I didn't do it right, or my movements aren't right. And there's so many subtle things you'll see that, a good example of this is you'll see pictures all the time of techniques that aren't quite, they're not in the right place with what they're doing, the angle of their blade or whatever. And I relate it to kind of like katas. Like in traditional karate, you'll see like X blocks like this, and you'll see, photos or drawings of a moment in time, and that moment of time is just that, a moment of time. And sometimes that moment that they captured wasn't in your head, it's not the right, it's not in the right spot or anything, right? So, just the angle of the blades on certain techniques, where it should be at in Frile, where it should be at in some of the cruchetes and everything else, you've got to have that one-on-one, like I mentioned before. And I can't get that. I can get it from some of the people in the States here, but that one-on-one is just, Arnold's just a great teacher. Not take it from anybody else either, but everybody else.
100%.
That's why I go to the Arnold.
Okay. Which kind of his other question was, so you have gone back and forth to the Philippines. We already asked when to start. And why do you continue to go? And you've kind of already answered that.
Yeah, I just love it. I'm not. This is what's interesting. to try to say this tactfully, is that I see a lot of people come in and out because of, training with KI. People come visit that, I see it all the time when I'm there training with Arnold. Somebody will come in for, a class or whatever, get the experience and leave. And that's great. That they're getting a feel for the system and everything. But, I don't have any, delusions of like where I'm going to go with this art. I'm just doing it because I love it. Right. So, I don't have any, like in 6 years, I want to be this rank or, that kind of garbage. Right. I just do it because I love it. So that's why I go back to Arnold, because I love the art, and I want to be a good representation of it, and I want to keep that relationship with him. So,
yeah, no. So, with regards, going back to KI, what could you tell the folks who maybe are watching, just some of the general characteristics about it, the system, how it, generally speaking, differs from others, and just generally speaking, for those who maybe are just not familiar with KI?
I think when you get trained with KI, as you get through the training, they'll start focusing more and more on understanding range. A lot of systems don't really do that a whole lot, right? They don't really talk about, how you can cut the person but not be cut, kind of thing. And other systems too don't really talk about the blade alignment. We talked about that before, is that in the grow styles, they don't really care so much about the blade alignment, the edge alignment. And I wonder, honestly, if you think about some of the European styles, you see some of them in the museums, you see the chunks in them. I don't know how much they really, in the middle of combat, I don't know how much you can really, keep that blade.
There's no way to tell me, man, there wasn't edge on edge.
Yeah. It had to happen, right?
I mean, you turn around, man, and it's
yeah, right.
It's like I forgot who I had on. Australia, GM Ray.
Right.
And he says, he goes, and it was kind of funny the way he said it, but he goes, well, do you think I'm more concerned with myself or the edge of my weapon?
Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah, so I think they have a great understanding of range, more so than some other of the other systems. The other systems do the range, right? But I don't know if they lay it out as well. Obviously, I mentioned before, Laguna systems have a great understanding of range as well. And both those help my range and my understanding of range in Kobutan too. So what happens is when you start understanding that range, when you start looking at grandmasters, you realize what they're doing, and they're already doing it, right? But they may not lay it out for you in the way that KI will they don't hide it from you, basically, right? They'll show it to you and they tell you exactly what they're doing, So, and then this blade, the way that KI works for their swords is different. There's similarities. You still look at Crusadas and things like that. You got Haradas and, things like that, going with the force and force to force and all this kind of stuff, right? But, you get some of the frailes and the floretes, those are kind of unusual, techniques, Medja fraile and things like that. You don't see those typically in.
That's funny. I was telling this to somebody, like they were asking me, and you would know this better than me. You've been exposed to more systems. But here, I've never seen systems, or like I understand the PTK Flarete. They hit the back of the edge.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the cones and sound blend, but in KI it's completely different, and I've not seen anybody do it like that. And Fraile,
Yeah, I think some of it has to do, and this is me purely speculating here, right? Is maybe the length of the weapon, right? Is that, if you think about a Zanzibar is typically a little bit longer than, say, a Tenegre, right? Or, or a Taliban, right? So they tend to be a little bit shorter. So I think if you look at some of those blades, they're clearly made more for chopping, versus piercing or slicing or things like that. The blade's just made different, right? It feels different in your hand. So almost like KI has more of a, I don't know how to explain it, but not an elitist, but more of a higher class of a person, like if you think about the Spanish, not that I'm trying to relate KI to Spanish at all, right?
Was going the same direction you were. Like, it's like, I think what they did was, I think they made a connotation or the comparison using like master's degree or something like.
Yeah. It's a very refined sword art, not that the other ones aren't, but the other ones are just pure, just killing.
I think you're right, though. I don't think they like. I looked at like a couple systems I played around with, and I just, for sake of politics, I'm not going to mention them. But
Yeah.
one, the tip goes behind them. It's like to treat it like the stick, as far as emotions and all that. There's definitely not that clarity and that separation, like KI is, or just a whole clarity on like why you would never bring the point behind you.
Yeah.
Tip and
Yeah. There's subtle things like that it's very basically it's a very refined sword art, and when I say that, I don't want to take away from the other arts, because the other arts are very refined too, right?
Sure.
But they're refined in what they do, so you don't, it's just different expressions.
Do you think that's due to the Spanish influence back in the day? Do you think that had something to do with it?
Probably, but it's so hard because a lot of people, there's so much of that we just don't know.
No, I know, but if I had to speculate, I'm just wondering,
probably, but who knows, really, right?
Yeah.
The problem is so many people try to square peg round hole kind of thing, and people try to force sometimes, or what's the opposite of that? but people try to force things sometimes, and they try to, I don't know, it's just combat,
Yeah, no, I just think obviously Illustrissimo was just a genius and just combat and just the experience, and not just having his physicality just being so unique, long arms, tall, and just
and I don't have any experience with like the Inosanto blend of the Illustrissimo from that side,
from
right?
from Regino.
Yeah. But I don't think it has the level of sophistication, I guess.
Not from what I've heard, no.
Yeah. I don't know that because I don't have any experience from it. But this
I'm in this. My first was in a solid blend, and nowhere to the degree of, I'm not saying maybe it wasn't there when but I've also heard this from others, that just not to the degree of what, as far as GM Illustrissimo and all that.
And obviously I'll paraphrase this with my KI, right? Is that this stuff I hear from my seniors and my own opinions, right? Obviously there's certain, you had Nico on here, when was it? Monday, and
actually Monday.
Yeah. He's been around for a long time. So obviously those are my seniors, right? They have a bigger well to draw from when it comes from that kind of stuff. Right. So I can only give you, and some of the things I say may be wrong, but they're my opinions. Right. So
yeah. Right. I mean, you just take what you're exposed to, and sometimes you draw a conclusion. I mean, it's,
I ask questions, and, I get answers, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong.
Yeah. Right. No. I think that's fair. I mean,
you talk about, some of the more sophistication. So you got Negros has a spotty daga that I see. We talked about this last time. Cebu, you'll see it, in the San Miguel systems and some of the other systems in Cebu. And obviously you see it in KI, right? But you don't really see a whole lot of spotty daga systems. And, I think I brought this up with somebody else, but, I mentioned this slightly, but this is a typical dagger that people use, And if you can think about KI, you're typically doing this motion with your cruzada, off an angle 4 in KI, right? Well, most of the time you get your knuckles busted, and the same thing when you're doing haradas or whatever, right? Because, you think this is the length of a spotted daga, this is not an antique, but this is like the length that you would have, right? So you can see the difference in that length. So obviously when you start doing, cruzadas and things like that, you've got a whole lot more room to play with. So you're not, cutting.
Yeah. So you're not, no.
Whatever. Same thing with your haradas, right? Everything's just so much more room to play with, but here again, here in the States, because of necessity or whatever we have, we use these, so sometimes it affects the way we do our cruzadas. Sometimes we have to modify them. Sometimes we have to correct our movement to make sure it's right, so you don't get knuckle busted.
So there's no residual contact coming down the barrel. I get you. Okay.
Yeah. And then again, when you have a longer dagger, and you'll see that with all the antiques, and you'll see it with modern spotted dagger sets too. Again, you'll see that long range of that dagger, because the dagger's going to thrust, and it's going to move around and all this kind of stuff. But it has to have the range, because if you don't, you're going to just knuckle bust. That's why sometimes you'll see with some of the daggers too, they'll start making these guards. You'll especially see that in the Negro style of swords. You'll start seeing like guards.
Okay.
To protect their hands, because again, the swords are a little shorter. Typically with Zanzibars, you don't really see it. occasionally maybe you may see it, but
what do you think here? Just a little off topic, but
yep.
you brought the name up, and I'm only going to ask you this question because I had some experience. I was very fortunate to go to a seminar way back when I was just getting the beginning of this with Tom Biggio, and he happened luckily he was just doing it on San Miguel, and it was the long and short. And do you have you been privy to that?
I don't know him, so.
No, not him, but I mean the long and short in general, though. From
yeah, if you look at I don't know for sure what you're talking about, but if you look in KI, there's always a long weapon or a short weapon out. Yeah, typically there's rare times, we can do cruzadas and a couple of times. So there's rare times where both weapons are out, right? Or both weapons are in. And you'll see that in Negro styles as well, too. It's typically there's a long weapon out and a short weapon in, a short weapon in, a long weapon out.
Yeah, one's out, one's back.
Yeah, one in and out, one. Yep. So you'll see that. That's a pretty common. But think about that with punching too. That's very common. That's a common.
It's not gonna be like.
it's a common movement. You always have to have a weapon loaded.
Yeah,
ready to go.
One's back covering center.
You'll see a lot of times with hey Alex, you'll see a lot of times with daggers in general. You'll see and you'll see this in just about every system. You'll see a low thrust, a high thrust, and a high thrust here. You'll see that triangle, right? Upside down triangle, whatever, right?
Okay.
That's very common too. You'll see that in Negro styles. You'll see that in a lot of systems, where they'll do that because it's a high feed, left, high feed right, and middle feed, So you'll see that a lot with the spotted dogger systems as well.
Here's an idea because I've been trying to get June on, and I've also offered to
offer him, lumpia or some mango shakes.
No. What about all three of you at one time?
We wouldn't get along.
You guys because you guys all do Kobaton and you guys do KI under the same sanction. That would be a show.
It would be fun. It would be fun.
Well, talk to your boys there. But
we'd have a blast. And we got to get Shelly here eventually too. So he's a wealth of information.
I'm always trying to get creative as far as future ideas for for episodes and all that. But I think that would be something. Get you three all at one time. You got
Yeah.
So okay. So then with regards to before we go on to the antiques there.
Well, let's talk about real quick. Let me back up for a second. Let's talk about
sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Back to the Philippines a little bit, right? So typically, you can fly in to Cebu, you can fly into Manila. Those are the main airports. There's a couple other small airports you can fly into, but the best way to do is find somebody that's in that system, that's like a senior in that system, whatever, or training in that system before, that can put you into contact, for instance, like somebody with Arnold or whoever it is, right? But the hardest part is this, is that if you go to some of these grandmasters, if you ask them how much,
for the
lesson or whatever, most of them won't tell you. Some of them that are commercialized will, right? But most of them won't tell you, right? And so it's hard to gauge how much do you pay, kind of thing, So the best thing to do there is that is to maybe talk to a senior, and find out how much, what's going to be fair. So typically it's the same thing you kind of pay in the States, maybe I don't want to say amounts or anything, right? But be generous, right? Because again, this is their livelihoods. This is how they're taking care of their
absolutely.
Families and everything.
You would.
There's been a few stories where people come in and they just don't do anything with the grandmasters, and they're not going to come back to you and go, "You didn't pay me."
That's so wrong, though.
Yeah, it is completely wrong, but they're not going to tell you. And if you ask them, how much, again, it's frustrating sometimes to go, how much do I owe you? And
right. They're not going to answer you.
Whatever.
Like you said, you're going there.
Yeah.
Try to get in contact with somebody who's familiar with them or might know, like you said, a senior, but not to give anything. I don't know. I don't know how you could do that when you're
taking people out there to do it. There's people out there to do it, and
that's a shame.
These people they're genuinely, especially some of the little known grandmasters, they're getting a little bit harder to find, but some of the lesser known grandmasters are they want to show you the art, they want to really go out of their way to show you the art.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe they know that they're not going to be around forever. That much.
They just want, sometimes it's it's that, which is the pure intent. Sometimes also they just want to share the art, to the States.
Yeah.
I've had grandmasters, ask me, will you be my representative in the States? And I don't tell them no, because honestly, I just don't feel like I'm, training with them a couple of times. I just don't feel like, but there's so many times where people will come asking for certificates too. And I think that's just a big no too, that happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, or the person doesn't want to disappoint them, and they might say, "Yeah, okay," and before you know it, they open up a whole can of worms, and yeah, wow, I just can't believe that though. Like, you have people go over there and that wouldn't like leave anything.
I see it. And then they don't give respect to, they don't tell people that they train with that particular person, or they learn that particular technique from that person. It's one thing to forget, after a while things start blending, but they certainly don't deny it when you've been asked about it. You need to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah. So, all right. So for folks who like want to go over there considering, so just
there's some people
suggestive. You're saying you get them in, they'll obviously do some research, get some people that can obviously help you with travels, what have you, especially first time, right?
Yeah, I can mention some names. Again, like some people can contact me. I don't want to put Alex on the spot. Alex knows a ton of people over there. He'd be good resources. Anthony from if you want to learn some Laguna systems or know some more stuff in Manila.
Anthony, are you talking about Payete?
Yeah, Payete systems. Yeah, and there's I don't want to leave out anybody's names, but there's James C, who's in Negros. He's a great resource too. So there's plenty of people out there, that are willing to help you. Alan Family's a great guy. He does he does some of the FMA gear that we have, right? He's a great guy.
Oh, who's that? I'm sorry, who's that?
Alan Fami.
Oh yeah, okay, yes.
Kalahi gear, yeah, he does that, and he's a great resource. He'll take you around, and invite you to stuff. He's a great resource, but there's plenty of people. Just ask around. You'll find out. Ask around and maybe ask multiple people so you don't get scammed or anything.
Yeah. So no, that's fantastic. Those who are going on. Have you three like collectively ever done like a seminar together in the States?
Me and Alex have done seminars together, and
June being in Europe
together. Yeah. But I don't think all of three of us have been together. I don't know. I can't remember.
Yeah, because
it was at the Colorado gathering we did with Combatan a while back. I think Alex is there. And we've been at our camps. We have our camp coming up in end of July here in Kansas. Last weekend of Kansas is our camp, and I know Alex will be there. I'll be there. June's got other engagements. But
so the three of you have there teaching, for camps.
We just don't advertise ourselves very well, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, some folks, they just that. But like, have you guys ever considered if June? I know he's in Europe there. Have you guys ever like? I don't know, American tour or something, the three of you.
No. I think we're so, it's like pulling teeth to get us to do things, right? Sometimes, it's like I fight personally with the balance of, I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the art, So
but you guys can all make it about the art.
It is. We can, but it's like, that internal battle is what I'm saying, right? Is that I don't want to advertise myself and like go off to a bunch, because to me, I'm like, I talk to some people sometimes and I go, hey, they say, oh, Dan, you're great and all this kind of stuff. And I keep telling them, well, you should see my teachers, and sometimes I'm like, they're right there in the same place. I'm like, you should probably just go see them.
Yeah. You're just being cordial and all that.
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
When you and Alex do your camp, are you just showing Kobaton?
It's our Cafeteria Mandarigament camp, right? So it's Shelly's organization, and Alex and June and I are all part of that organization. So Alex will come, and Alex can show anything. He can show the blend talk if he wants. He can show the KI. He can show the Kobaton. Typically, he'll show the KI, aspects.
So when he goes to your place in Florida?
Yeah, because of my place in Florida, he'll do Kobaton. Sometimes he'll do KI. I think the last few times he's done KI. The very last seminar he had, we came out to my place. We did a Espada Daga Negro style. So
that would have been neat.
Yeah.
How do you bring him like annually, bi-yearly, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I think he's been on my place about once a year, just because we're good friends, honestly.
At least once a year?
Yeah, we're just good friends, and Shelly's been on my place too, but Shelly's more busy sometimes, so it's hard to get him out. I would love to have him out more, to my place more. Most time I go out to see him. But he's it just works out that way. It's not like we go whatever way. I'll call Alex up when I think last time Alex was like, I just need to get out of California. I'm like, okay, we'll come to my house. So it's just one of those things where we're such good friends.
What's wrong with California?
Oh, no, yeah, really.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But that's how it happens. We typically don't plan anything. We plan to visit come see me, and then we worry about the seminar after.
Yeah, I think I recall, like, you have them down there. I think I caught one of it like last minute, but I think it'd be kind of neat. Like, I would, if I knew you guys were doing something like that in advance, I would like to definitely attend.
I think I've probably been on it 5 or 6 times maybe. June's been down there a couple of times. So
James, I'm sorry, who?
June.
Oh, June. Okay. All right. What we got here? Another excuse to well,
it's all right.
Fix definitely. Yeah. Well, it looks like maybe Chad's camp.
Yep.
We can all. I think we'll all be together, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely well. Okay, so all right. Anything else you want to share as far as regards to your trips to the Philippines?
Trips to the Philippines, it's the most English friendly country of all the Asian countries. Everybody pretty much speaks English. When you get out to some of the other like islands, some of the older people may not speak English. They'll just speak Tagalog or Visayan, right? But you don't have to know the language to get around. Especially around Manila and the more popular cities, the bigger cities. You can speak English. They don't have they have a thing called Grab there, which is like a Lyft or an Uber, so you can get around there pretty easy. There's taxis. Grab was harder to use this last trip. Just after the pandemic, there's not as many drivers.
So similar to Uber? Okay.
Yeah, similar. But my point is that transportation is pretty easy. When you get out to some of the islands, you have to prepare it a little bit better. But you can get the trike rides and all this kind of stuff. Transportation's easy.
So if you were to just stick around the Manila area and adjacent areas there, Uber or what you mentioned there is the way to go?
Yeah, Grab. And then, like I said, when Grab's on around, you get some of the metered taxis,
Okay.
Taxis, you kind of got to watch a little bit. It's typical, they'll try to rip you off a little bit. When you land at the airport, that's the worst. They'll coach all kinds of prices for you at the airport. There used to be a Grab sitting right outside the airport in Manila. It's not there anymore. It used to be a little booth. So you kind of got to get the taxis, but you'll hear everything from 2,000 pesos to 10,000 pesos. You'll hear all kinds of crazy prices, and that's where they'll rip you off. That's your first one right off the bat.
Do you know offhand the equivalent of what's 1,000 pesos to the US dollar?
Yeah, it's like 50. It's like $20 to 100 pesos. $20 to 100 pesos, 1,000 pesos rather. Sorry, $20 to 1,000 pesos.
So okay, 20 to 1,000.
Yeah, the exchange rate's gotten better, so it's a little bit more than that, right? But the exchange rate's a little bit better, and I think it's like 55 now to dollar or something.
So, with regards to if you were to go into Manila, and you were definitely going south, is the best way to do. There's no trains, I'm guessing, nothing like that.
They do have a couple like subways there that you can take, but I haven't used them yet. I always just take a Grab.
You just take the plane. Okay. All right.
Yeah, and then you can get the app, and it's just like Uber basically, and you can
okay.
It keeps the price down. You know what the price is right away. If you can't do that, you find a metered thing, or you get somebody like Coach Arnold to drive you in the back of his motorbike.
Oh boy.
Motorbike's the way to go around there, but it's the most dangerous.
Yeah, you could just cut through traffic, I'm guessing, right?
Oh,
yeah, you just we got I'll make sure I'm not missing any questions here.
Yeah, Michael
got taken for $100 by an airport taxi. Oof.
We've all been there, every single one of us. Okay. They've been there, done that. It's just you just grin and bear it and know that you got screwed and this.
Yeah, it's all happened at one time or another in life. It's happened to all of us, right?
Mm-hmm. That's the thing to understand is you're gonna get screwed, you're gonna get scammed. It's going to happen.
You need to get Miguel Ruby on it. Yes, we had him on June. We had him on, actually. It was a theme episode regarding with Tim Hartman and somebody else. I forgetting the nature of the show. I think it was FMA Schools, but I definitely would be more than happy to get him on individually if he wants to. He just
Yeah,
needs to.
he runs FMA Supply too, so he's another great resource for getting like
Oh,
sticks.
really? All right. Well, okay.
Yeah. Same thing with
Actually,
Chris
I'm going
Gaiman. You know, Chris is
to.
on here too, so Chris can does a lot of the makes a lot
Yeah,
of
Chris, right.
stuff.
I'm going to write his name down right now in my ongoing list of future guests.
Yeah.
Which keeps growing. All right, we go, Ruby. Okay. All right. All right. So I'm ready for the
swords. Talk about them a little bit. Okay.
If you're ready, I'm ready.
All right. So just talk about some of the different swords. I kind of go down up.
Hey, Alex, high five to you.
Yeah. So some of the swords, you'll find the fancier swords, like the more I don't know how to say intricate swords come from Mindanao area. That's where you find your Chris's. That's where you find your Barongs at. So we'll have a couple of just grab a couple Chris's, whichever one doesn't matter.
How many blades do you have in total?
I don't know.
60
or 60 here, maybe, and then maybe another 30 at my house, other place. So wow, I keep them locked away. So there's different types of swords. Like, you can see when you start, without getting too much details, you can start seeing some of the older, like the Chris's that you see typically from Indonesia and places like that. You'll start seeing the Chris's that give me an archaic one first. Yeah. So you'll start seeing the Chris's that you can see there's definitely an influence between the two, right? I'm not going to get a whole lot of detail with it because this very controversial. We start talking about like what each one represents, like this represents a serpent or this represents like the, Middle Earth and all this kind of crap, right? So this is like we call these archaic swords. So they're not quite as big, but a normal Chris would be, a normal Chris would be about right here, probably. Maybe here, an Indonesian Chris is what you would think. And we call these archaic swords just because they're kind of like a transition piece, for lack of a better word. But you can't pick this up and this one right here, but this is what makes it unique. Some of the things that are unusual is it's got what we call a twist core in it. So it's a core of typically another weapon will get used, or something, another piece of metal will get used. Sometimes people will say that if they conquered a particular person, had a fight with them, they respected them, they put their weapon inside here and twist into a new weapon, and a lot of times you'll find ivory, hilts, when you look through here. So this is like again an archaic one, but then you start seeing them after a while get a little bit bigger. Give me a Jingai hilt too. Yeah. You'll start seeing them getting a little bigger. So you see this one's bigger, longer, right? This is a straight Chris. You'll still see some ivory. Sometimes this will be bone, If you ever get ivory from other countries, it's technically illegal to bring it into the States.
So to bring it in. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're buying from other countries, you kind of got to be wary of that, We're already drug smuggling and antique smuggling. But here's another example, a twist core. You can see a little bit more here. So you can see there's a core inside there.
I do.
It's almost like a Damascus pattern, but it's literally a twist core. So you'll see it. And again, there's different things that, without going into too much detail, but all these things mean something. This emblem here, this all means
incredible.
But you see the little bigger. My theory is that they probably grew, and this is just my theory, right? Is that they grew in size probably because it's like I need a bigger hammer because whatever I'm fighting is bigger, maybe, or better armor or something. So you'll start seeing them get a little bit bigger, and then you'll see some of them get into like Jingayan hilts, which we call these Jingayan, which means this is big, right? So you see the hilts like huge. This part of the pommel, right? It becomes huge, and the blade again. Sometimes you'll see them more curvy. Typically you'll see that they have smaller hands for sure. Some of these don't really fit in.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, it would make sense, right? Smaller stature people. Okay.
Hey, Vico. So again, this becomes much bigger. And you think about this big piece in ivory, it's pretty big. You got think of anything else you got over there too? We can grab. Sure. Yes. So you gotta start seeing that in the Mindanao area. Those have a little more intricate parts to them,
influence.
Yeah, more influences, but there's other countries too.
Moros.
And then you start seeing like barongs, you know, so you can see the pattern in this barong, right?
Can I see the spine of yours? Okay, you got okay. All right.
It's a healthy. It's not the biggest spine.
Yeah.
It's healthy spine though. You know, if I compare it to like a cap on a water bottle, it's a healthy spine.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
And again, you know, some of the shapes of things, you know, the shapes of this will tell you whether it's Tasuk or Samal or which part of the Mennonite area it comes from. So a lot of this stuff, you know, there's ways to identify it, but again, it gets controversial. And the reason I don't go through a lot of details of like, you know, this means this, you know, this is like this is why we it's made this way, you know, and in particular is because some people are writing books still, you know, and they're kind of close guarding that. So the stuff they share with me, they don't want to share with the rest of the world yet because they want to.
They're waiting for you. I gotcha.
Okay. Yeah. So it's, you know, they want to make money off it or whatever. And so some of these are bigger pieces. Here's another barong. You can see the hilt here is ivory inlay, you know.
Just,
and then
like, just such craft. Like they put.
You see the pattern in that one.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. This one's not quite as thick, but it's thick.
No. Yeah. The spine. Yeah.
You know. So the interesting thing about the barong is that you can see.
You know
what's
what I mean?
that?
Just the pride in the work. You know what I mean? Like you can just tell they had pride. You know.
What's interesting about the barong is that you don't see this anywhere else, right? You can see like pieces like a Compilin or, you know, even a Chris. You can see similarities in other countries. You can kind of almost like trace where it's coming from. But when you start looking at barongs, it's from there, you know, from the southern parts of Mindanao. So it just pops up, you know.
Yeah. I mean,
now I know what it represents typically too. Barong means bird, right? So, you know, typically sometimes some people say it means it's a fish. I don't necessarily agree with that.
I mean, it's just wonderful. Just like, again, you can just see the craftsmanship and the, you know, it's just.
Can you have these?
What's that now?
Pira. So.
I'm sorry. What's that?
Pira.
Oh, Pira. Okay.
Yeah. So you can see this, you know. So again, the handle's shape. I've heard all kinds of different explanations for this. You know, it's been some of them get pretty interesting theories, you know. But you know, you don't find very many of those, you know. So again, that's again that area. And then we start moving up. Where else we got? Somewhere.
Go into wow.
Tenegres. Yeah, we'll go to some Visaya areas.
So now everything you have, the 60 here, the 30 back at your house, are all antiques?
Yeah, pretty much. We got some newer ones. Like there's a blade here that
90 antiques. That's
here's a newer blade. This is based off Tony's design.
Zanzibar?
Yeah, Zanzibar. You know. This is very, very light, but it's a nice design I got from
But the Zanzibars, generally speaking, though, aren't they on the lighter end? Generally speaking,
most Zanzibars, no. Heavy-ish. Here's a Tenegre, right?
Tenegre.
So, see, that one's pretty thick in its spine too. You know, and
what's your address?
Back, but here's
June wants your address.
Yeah, right. That's why we keep these under lock and key and guarded. These are some of the nicer ones.
Coming right up, June.
Yeah, but you'll see a lot of times the like there's a edge here. It's a chisel grind, so you'll find an edge there, but not here. So this side will be flat. This side won't be. So again, that's the design slightly different from you would with the Zanzibar, which have typically both edges there. So you'll start seeing guards on them. So clearly not a machete, and you'll start seeing some designs. It's hard to say here, but you'll start seeing some designs, but they're not anywhere near as articulate as some of the southern Mindanao areas, right? But hefty. But you can see this motion's completely different from a Chris.
That's got to be top heavy, man. When you project
no,
that
not top heavy. No, you'd be surprised. It's not top heavy. The weight's like right here. Yeah.
Yeah, because of the chisel grind, it thins out.
So. Yeah, it thins it out because of the grind. Okay. Another thing too is like people try to use Chris's and things like that. Half the people probably don't know how to use what the Chris's. Hardly, it's like the Salat from Mindanao, right? Hardly anybody ever sees it. So nobody, the stuff we do in FMA won't work for a Chris, or a barong really. You know, people try to again fit it in the hole. You know,
the square peg and
square peg.
You know.
And
do you want to see some of those?
no, we'll see some of these grobs. Then you start getting some grobs. You know, so
What do you got here?
this is a grob. You know,
grob. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So again, you'll see sometimes, you know, little things, you know, eyelets that you look for, cloth that you look for. They all mean different things. And then you'll see this is a typical garab, you know, but you'll see you can't see the pattern here very well, but the pattern again, it's very, you know, layered there. You can see the laminate pattern. But then again, you know, little things that when you start playing with it, putting your thumb there changes completely how this moves.
That's the handle here. June's cracking. Tell June to stop instigating and.
But you know how you would move with this is going to be completely different from how you would move, you know, a Tenegri or a Talibang, right? It's going to be completely different. You know.
Can't you see the handle, like the handle in relation to the?
This is the handle.
Says
So most of the time you'll see this piece missing.
Okay.
And a lot of times people think that it's like broken off. I'm sure some of them do get broken off, but a lot of them it's just interferes, right? So a lot of people when they're fighting with those cut it off because it interferes with it. But this shape means something again too, you know.
Show the thickness of the spine.
Yeah.
That's an interesting.
So look how thick that spine is there, you know.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So if I look at show that next to the water bottle.
Oh my gosh.
You can see how thick that is, right? So garabs are harder to find now. They can get quite expensive.
As far as antiques, you mean?
Yeah, we fight Michael Ruby a lot for the garab.
Hi, Michael.
Yeah. So, you know, but a lot of people me and Caleb both, we learned everything we learned about collecting from Shelley, who's like museum quality knowledge when it comes.
That's incredible. That's
yeah,
awesome,
yeah.
So everything showed there. Mindanao?
What's that?
And all the blades you currently have shown down below.
Nope. So the Chris's typically in the Barong will be from Mindanao area.
Yeah.
You got
not the Zanzibar, but the other ones.
The Tenegres are from like Ilongo, maybe that area, you know. And then these are from Garabs are from
so Samar.
Yeah, Samar area.
Samar,
yeah. You know,
start a fight over
general area, you know.
Yeah, that is just.
So you start moving. When you start seeing Luzon swords, typically, do you have any Luzon? You'll see typically Luzon swords, you'll see leather a lot of times, and you'll be like your typical what you think of is like Ponutes or Dahan Palais, things like that. You know, I showed some of those last time. They'll be from that.
From the upper north. Okay.
But typically, when you see certain things, you see a peened handle. You typically right away. You think Luzon, you know, because that's what they did mostly when they were there, you know. But again, they all move a certain way as they do it.
So June wanted to point out that last spine, it's very thick.
Yes, it's very. June would know this. So, but yeah,
if you wanted to show that detail was.
Oh yeah. So this is what's important about the swords. I mentioned this last time, and we said this is that the problem with most FMA in the States is that the stick represents every sword known to man, right? So
when they're practicing, when the lack of having a training sword, I got.
Yeah. So you know, and the rattan doesn't like. There's certain things that you can feedback with rattan. You know, if you, being a guy who uses stick a lot, right? Is that, you know, the typical, not to criticize other styles, but typical, you know, check, you know, hit check that you would see with a sword probably doesn't work as well with a stick, you know, because the friction is not there to go along the spine. You know, when you
the side of it. I got
you don't have the friction there, and that stick can have a tendency to continue through, you know. So there's certain things you have to do. You have to apply. You have to change the mechanics of how you use the stick to make the stick work. Because if you're going stick against stick, the mechanics are different. If you're going sword against sword, the mechanics are different. If you're using a certain type of sword, then the mechanics are different, right? So the style you practice, if your style is from, let's say, Negros, right? Then there's certain swords that are from Negros and certain movements those swords will make. So it'll help you understand your own system better. You know, if you try to do that system and try to use a Garab, for instance, to do your Negros stuff, it won't work. You know,
It's a good example of blade on blade.
Yeah.
If you want to.
Yeah. Here's a good example of blade on blade.
Oh yeah.
You know,
No, that's a. What do you have there?
It's a Garab.
Garab. Okay.
Yeah, but edge to edge, lots of edge to edge there, right? You know,
and that's generally from the Negros area.
Depends. Some it can be some more, can be other areas. You know, more around that Visayan area though. But yeah, you can see
Did
that.
You get some of these from. You get some of these from Maestro Miguel or no?
Some of them. So what I was going to mention that before is that I don't want to rat out Michael here or anything, but he collects swords too. And again, I think Shelley's the one that got him collecting swords, or his big influence with him with that. But yeah, we'll trade swords. When we find a lot of times is.
All right, I definitely got to get him on.
Yeah. So what's unique is we'll all, like, as you trade up, your collection gets a little bit better. So you're changing things, right? You're changing out,
Okay.
So he'll pass on swords that he doesn't want anymore, and most times it's for research purposes, right? So we'll collect weird pieces. Do you have anything weird? Yeah. We'll collect weird pieces that don't fit, right? So this hilt doesn't really fit, this writing doesn't fit, these symbols that are on here doesn't fit. Some of them are Christian, some of them are Templar. That doesn't fit at all, So you wonder, okay, well, that's unusual. So I want to research that more, right?
Yeah, it is, right. Like why?
Yeah, and figure out why. So some of the pieces you get are unusual. So you want to figure out, well, why is that the case? You have what's that? Zanzibar? No, Zanzibar.
June's asking if you have any from
Lady.
Lady?
Yeah.
What are you looking for?
You want something from Lady? It's my
Tamar. Other than Tamar.
Monster?
Yeah.
That's an unusual piece.
So this is unusual. What do you think from Lady here?
No, I don't know. I don't. They're at your house.
No, they're.
You got handguard, all right.
Yeah, this is long. This is like huge.
So what now is that? That's almost like, man, cavalry, like in the States. Man.
Yeah, it's huge, right? So I don't know what size of the Filipino was, honestly, right? Because this is
yeah, that's like Civil War General Lee.
Yeah. So again, this piece doesn't fit, So you go, okay, well, that's unusual, But get the map out for a second.
Yeah.
So certain things, going back to why you collect, right, is that you're trying to put stories together, and it's controversial. Like I said, some people purposely put misinformation out because they do, but so that some people won't agree with everything. But if you start looking at maps, here, where am I at here? Upside down here. Yeah. So if you look at, let me kind of find Negros here. Here's Negros. Sorry, got me here. Okay. Here's Negros, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So Mindanao is going to be down here, right? Here's Negros. Here's Luzon, right? Well, if you look at some of Ilongo, right? Here's Bacolod right here, and right across this inlet here is Ilio, right? So that's where El Sai supposedly came from, right? When the 12 Grandmasters, they had like guerrilla fighters, whatever their story was, the origin stories, and they got together and they learned a fighting style. Well, you see some of the same motions right here in Bacolod because they're literally like right next to each other.
Right next to neighbors. Okay.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And the same thing if you look at where Katong was from, which is right here on this very tip here of Cebu, this area right here, supposedly. Well, Leyte's right here, and that's where Zanzibars are from, So you start putting things on maps and things start making.
Oh, you get a better idea as far as I get you.
Yeah. And like I said, some stuff will be controversial, like, some people are trying to push the HEMA thing, which is fine, whatever, right? With some of the styles, where their influence came from. Some try to push the Spanish influence a whole lot, and there's just a lot of unknowns, right?
No, right, exactly.
We got a conversation one time where somebody said that they're all the swords are like farmers tools, and some of these clearly are not farmer tools.
Definitely,
Yeah.
Definitely heard that, and I can't. So Julius made a comment here, might be interesting. Some of the symbols straight from the Morris as well.
So yeah, some of the symbols can be from different places, right? So again, it's part of that research, So, and sometimes you don't have answers to it, Sometimes you see markings on swords and you don't understand what the marking's for, So again, it's part of the study. There's groups, there's forums you can go to, and a lot of times people will argue with each other, over it because it's very much like FMA, in that scenario, which style is better, whatever, right? But some people go, well, this is what I believe the history or origins of it are. And sometimes people agree with origins of certain techniques, or certain swords. But my point is that if you understand some of the basics of the antique swords, find out where they're from and the styles they're from will answer a lot of questions, because sometimes the origins stories they're all over the place, right? And sometimes you'll see like different systems the systems clearly kind of been put together or whatever from other styles, and that'll answer your question, because most times the style came from the sword that was being used, right? The certain movements came from the sword that was being used. Yes, they could have refined that sword afterwards, but they probably just didn't come up with a stick and go, this is my movements, now I'm gonna make a sword with it.
I'm saying that like how the sword would dictate, paying the sword would ultimately dictate the style.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of my point, right? Is that I think it dictates a lot, So yeah, there's magical symbols a lot. So what Julius is saying, right? There's a lot of times they'll use magic symbols on their swords. They'll use magic things. Most people are familiar with anti-nanting, right? But they'll do it even with tattoos. They'll do it with garments that they wear. But what's unusual is, like if you see some of these garments that they'll wear, prayer cloths or whatever you want to call them, you'll see Muslim symbols, you'll see Masonic symbols, you'll see Christian symbols, you'll see them all kind of covering the whole gambit, right? So it becomes kind of unusual, right? But
where they have three different.
There's a lot of that.
Origin. All right.
Yeah, you'll see that in scabbards a lot. You'll see like symbols put into scabbards, and some of them are what he's talking about.
I just think it's just so neat, like that they took the time. It was that symbolic to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was.
It just. What do you got? What else do you have for Zanzibars?
Zanzibar.
Here's a question for you. Do you know the ones that sometimes have the black and white handles, or
like this kind of stuff?
Yeah, but what's that about?
If he's talking about these are all from lady kind of area, right?
Is that kind of
it's kind of like the design of their sheaths. So
I got it.
This one right here. Can you grab that one? Yes. Probably get out. You'll see any of these new ones. You'll see a lot of these newer ones, right? These are your traditional. Typical will have this handle here. These are your traditional. This is a trainer, so doesn't have an edge on it or anything.
So generally speaking,
this one's from
my handle to tip, were they around 30, 31 inches?
Yeah, about 30, 32, supposedly. And you'll see different designs, right? These are all newer, right? But you'll see people with different designs here. So a lot of times in most of the swords, like KI will even do this where they won't edge that portion of it, So when they do certain techniques, it doesn't bind, when they're crashing in, for instance, it won't bind. So a lot of times they won't have this lip like this necessarily, right? But this, again, these are all modern. So you can go to Lady and get it. There's whole towns where you can go down the whole street and get.
Just nothing but Zanzibars.
Yeah, this one's Vico actually gave us this one, so it was a gift. So it was awesome.
Yeah.
But most of the lady ones are newer that I have that are trainers.
So where do you suggest I get a Zanzibar?
There's people on Facebook. There's groups that you can join. There's people that are selling Zanzibars. Unfortunately, there's a few scammers on there too, so you kind of got to do your research. The hardest problem getting your best bet, honestly, is to find somebody that'll go there and get them for you. Right.
I know.
That's your best bet.
Just bring it back. Now you know what you're getting,
Yeah. But you can still get them. The problem is getting them from, like, let's say Leyte to Manila and then get them shipped out to you. Right. So, so that's the hardest part. When we went to Negros one time, we brought a bunch of swords. that had newer swords, and it was during the time where they're doing the elections. So when you do that, you can't have any kind of weapons, right? So we're in the airport in the Gross, and they won't let us take any of the weapons home. They won't let us check them even, right? You can't have them even in check bags or anything. So we had to leave them at the airport. But thankfully, our friend Max Mahone who grabbed them, and it took us maybe 6 months to a year, I think, to get them back.
Oh, to finally get them. My goodness.
Yeah.
Hey, we got a question. It probably was due to you know what it was really due to, Dan?
What's that?
You had June. You know what it was really due to? You had June with you. That's why.
That's probably what it was. June. Alex was there too, so it could have been Alex too.
All right. Here's a question from Bridget Morris. Question: could some of the sword symbols come from a family, and they not only want to make the sword for their style, but also identify the fighters themselves?
It could be, yeah. It could be all those different reasons, right? Most of the time, it's a mystical symbol, though, right? Because most of the time, they're trying to, there's tons of stories with Tatong, right, where he was trying to, he would say prayers supposedly, protections, and that's a common thing, or they have the auntie, So there's tons of stories about that from tons of different people, right? So that's probably more likely than
Yeah, they were like, maybe there was a family, right? Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
It's probably more magical symbols than family,
or tribe, or whatever you're affiliated with, or what have you.
Could be. It depends. Like I said, you'll see some of those mystical symbols, though. Yes, Vika, we still have them. I just showed that one a minute ago that we got from you. So
Julius is mentioning something here. You can find a lot of the same signs and scripts, both in Latin, sometimes Italian, Hebrew, Muslim symbols, and a lot of them you find in. Okay.
Yeah, they'll be combined. Like I said, there's not you won't. If you look at swords, and symbols, you won't say that they're always like Muslim. You won't say that they're always like Christian symbols. It's typically like a mixture. But yeah, prayer cloths are a common thing. That's what Julius is talking about too.
There's all these swords. I just think that's wow. That's freaking awesome. How long? How many years you've been cracking at this?
Collecting swords?
Yeah.
I don't know. We've got it heavy.
Yeah, you got to tell the story.
I'll tell him in a minute.
Okay.
I don't want to embarrass Alex. but I don't know. It varies, right? Because the first sword I collected was probably 10 years ago or longer, maybe 15 years ago. Okay. And when Shelly would, this was interesting, is I have maybe 6 swords that belonged to Shelly at one time. Right. And then they got to me somehow. And sometimes it's not like, in the past he may go, hey, do you want to buy this sword? And I'm going like, when I first collect swords, I'm going like, I'm not going to pay $800 for that, because they can get expensive. Now they're even stupid expensive now compared to what they were at the time, right? But anyway, it's like one of those things where I'll say no or I'll pass on swords, and then years later I'll get a sword and Shelly will go, oh, that used to belong to me. And these swords, people believe that kind of go with what Julius is talking about here. Sometimes people believe these swords kind of have a spirit to them, or they have like a, it has a life of its own, right? And whether you believe in mystical stuff or not,
I do.
Yeah, sometimes I do, because sometimes these swords definitely will come out and bite you, and you can tell when some of them are unhappy, and there's certain not rituals or anything like that, but there's certain processes you do to kind of calm.
I think it's all neat. I think there's
certain things you can do to calm the swords down. Some swords don't like to touch other swords. There's swords that you get a feeling like this sword's just not, you don't want to touch this sword. There's something about the sword you just don't want to touch it.
It was once owned by Illustration. Do not.
Yeah, right. No, there's some swords like you get these films about. I didn't believe it, but when I first got one of the bronze I have is everybody touches it, feels something from it, right? But when I first felt it, it was like zing kind of thing, right? And I don't necessarily believe in that kind of stuff at the time, right? Now there's probably something to it, right? I don't know what it is exactly, but it was like one of those things where I was going, wow, okay, I don't know. The guy.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, wow, he kind of asked me, he sit with it for a few minutes. He goes, do you feel okay with it? And I go, yeah, I feel okay with it. And I ended up getting home with it. And the person I got that particular sword from, I don't really care for, right, anymore, but I can't get rid of it. It's like it won't let me sell it. right? And I've thought about it a couple of times. It's just happy where it's at. I
It's
know
not doing
people,
any harm, right?
yeah, I know where collectors have gone. Like they've talked to other collectors and go, hey, I'm looking for this particular sword, and they go, well, what kind of sword are you looking for? Well, I'm looking for a Chris, all this kind of stuff. And sometimes they'll go, I've been having these dreams about this Chris, or this particular sword, whatever it is. And I keep having this dream over and over again, and they go, well, that's weird because I have that sword and I keep having nightmares about that sword. So it's
there you go.
yeah. So they're like, okay, I'm happy to give it to you. Now it sounds kind of crazy and everything, right?
Paid, everything's covered.
Yeah, it sounds crazy. I don't want to get too weird or wild with it or anything like that, right? But that kind of stuff happens.
I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, and some swords, like I said, they'll cut you. It just you wake them up. Yeah, you wake them up, and you can touch that sword, and just every time you touch it, it tries to nick you in some way. So it can be quite interesting, And like I said, some people will prescribe to that more than others,
I think okay. We got Alex is begging you to not tell the story.
Yeah, I won't tell the story because Alex will kill me.
He's asking you to tell the story.
Yeah, it has to do with 3 midgets, a blowgun.
Oh boy.
No.
It's
we almost killed somebody in the Philippines. Is what happens.
Oh boy. So Julius, they would write said scripts, not only in the swords but in the panalito.
Yep.
Okay, it's handkerchief, piece of paper that carry or.
Yeah, he's talking about stuff in the hills. Like some in the Indonesian Chris's a lot of times too. They'll call them gins, but they'll put something inside where the jewel meets the hilt. A lot of times they'll put that's where they put the gin kind of thing. A lot of times you'll find when you take them apart, you'll find prayer cloths inside there. And the prayer is kind of there to help you try to keep the gin inside. The weapon. So there's all kinds of stuff like that that you can get into with swords. Like I said, it's a huge subject, and there's so much like
I can tell you right now, man, just listen to you. There's stuff I never.
Yeah, I'm not trying to go as deep as what Julius is going, but he's definitely, he's on the right track. Julius
definitely does his homework, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely that mystical side of things, So these swords are really, they're not just a tool. They take a life of their own a lot of times, and you'll see that again with
that is just so
the way the sword's made. Everything with, especially when you get into Chris's, they cover a lot of times their religion within the Chris. So
I mean, think about when you get to the more, wow, that is just so neat. That's like wow. Who
I learned all this from Shelley.
Yeah, no, God, we got to try. I'm trying to get him on here.
Yeah,
trying.
Yeah.
It's been what else you got? Far as like, what do you got from Luzon?
All the Luzon stuff's at my other place.
Well, that's right. What do you got?
Take Luzon. We got more Chris's here because they're the more expensive. They're the more expensive ones typically. Minus the garabs over here. The garabs can be expensive. So this whole rack here is garabs. Okay. Don't look, Michael. So his whole rack here is garabs.
Is the next one over Chris's?
These right here. Yeah, hold on a second. This right here are all typically like the cyan blades, probably Elongo. Then you have there's Chris's here.
Yeah.
These are all Chris's, and here they're all Chris's there too.
So do you got enough Chris's?
No. So we got Chris's on the other wall and then some other wall over here too.
So is Chris like your favorite?
No, I think so Caleb here collects a lot too. We share our collection, right? So he likes Chris's more so, I think, because they're more elaborate. There's more to them. You get the twist cores, you get the things that are really cool about them, right? A lot of times you'll find the symbols in them. I like the Visayan blades, more because
you like the Visayan, okay?
Yeah, because it fits more what I do, because again, half of us don't even know how to use a Chris in reality. Same thing with Barong, right? Because it's a completely different style that's kind of hidden from us. MFA is different than FMA, right?
Yeah, and I tell you, they don't like it when they're thrown under the umbrella of FMA.
Yeah. Yep.
As well as they shouldn't like it.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah, but it will open up the whole world. Like this whole, where's that? Oh, behind you, that whole shield behind you. You see, everybody collects that. Half those swords are all wrong. You know, they're named wrong and everything, right? But people collect them anyway. You know. But,
it's almost like when you get an FMA a couple of years, you have to have one. You know,
yeah, you buy those shields and you get them in the Philippines.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I got the shield. I'm good now. Yeah.
But it'll determine again once you understand, like, you know, half the time when you do research, you'll find that the way people, after a while, when you learn your research, people using pure is completely wrong. You know, they're kind of guessing how it's used. The compelin, you know, is probably used completely wrong. Most people, the way you use it, even garabs, the way people use them are probably not completely wrong. You know, I say wrong. You know, I'm using that term, right? But it's just probably not the correct way that you would see from the style.
All right.
You
know
know,
how many companions there?
Yeah, we got it. We got a couple. So we got a little bit of everything. Like between our collection, I have a tendency to keep more of the science stuff, you know, on my side. I have some of the older Chris's, but here's a compelin. And it's unusual to find the staples intact and then the hair, you know, but here's
that is awesome.
Wow. Compelin.
Was it like about 36 inches thereabouts, or
probably 32? Something like that.
No, it's long. I'd have to put a ruler on it.
Let me take my pants.
Wait, guys. Close. You know,
it's close. It's like, divide by 2. I don't know.
Oh my God, June is resonating in you.
I know. That's why we can't. June's
bad influence is coming through the virtual.
But you look on. I'll share something with you. So you look at without, again, I don't want to. This is all going to be controversial, and half the people will go, "That's bull crap" or whatever, right? But using this thumb on the garab changes the way this moves versus this. You know, so it changes the way it moves. This is going to, your ocho patterns are going to, I don't have much room here. The ocho patterns are going to be very common. Thrusting off an ocho pattern, you know, or an X pattern, or whatever, is going to be real easy, right? This big honking in the middle is going to make passing things a lot easier.
With the belly there in the middle, yeah.
With the belly when you're getting close, right? So there's movements to be understood that are coming from this garab that unless you take this garab and play with it, you're not going to understand it. But at the same token, if somebody goes, "Oh, my style's from, you know, these type of guerrilla fighters that I knew used garabs from that area," right? And then they do the style, and I'm going like, "Oh, that looks nothing like what you would use that sword." So again, that'll answer questions a lot to help you understand your own style. It'll refine your movements, you know, and it'll help you understand the culture behind it.
Wow. I'm going to definitely have to get Michael Ruby on.
Oh, yeah. Go back a little bit to the Philippines, right? So you learn a lot about FMA by going to the Philippines. And it's not just the cultural aspects, right? Because again, it's really English friendly, you know. Yeah. So you'll find things, you know, but the way traffic flows, right? You'll really get an understanding of what flow really is by going to the Philippines and seeing how trikes fly in, motorbikes fly in, buses fly in, you know, jeepneys fly in. They're in and out of each other, right? You'll learn how short weapons, for lack of a better word, flow with long weapons or big weapons. You'll get a completely different understanding of what flow really is. Just
by watching the vehicles, just kind of like.
Yeah, just take a YouTube video, you know, and pull up traffic in Manila, you know, and see how everything has to flow. It flows out of necessity. And that's how FMA is too, right? Your flow happens out of necessity.
We're interesting correlation. Wow.
Yeah, it's not out of technique. And I learned this from Shelly, right? Because Shelly, again, he asked me questions and makes me ponder certain things. Hey, coach. So he makes you ponder certain things, you know. But again, you get an understanding of what flow really is. You know, and flow a lot of times comes out of the necessity of the movement of whatever you have. And also you learn about how people interact with each other, right? I know it's getting too deep, but I laugh sometimes. Eric says it's getting deep, but I'm trying to stay surface. It's hard. Yeah. But I laugh sometimes because in the Philippines, you know, you'll see how people adapt, especially anywhere, Manila or anywhere, but especially outside Manila, because it's a little quieter and your brain can kind of relax a little bit, right? And you can kind of, you have more time to see things and it's not so busy, right? It's kind of like taking the internet off, turning the internet off for a while or TV off, right? You calm you down a little bit and your brain can think a little bit more, but you'll start seeing how people adapt, you know? And I tell my students all the time is I'm going to show you something and I'm going to show you how to do it. And I'm going to tell you how to do it a different way. I'm going to constantly make you adapt, you know, because I'm going to constantly make you adapt, because the person that adapts the quickest is the person who's going to win the fight more than likely. Right. And the Filipino people in general they learn how to adapt. And I laugh sometimes, don't mean this offensively at all, but I grew up being a redneck, right, in the country, you know, and so we adapted with everything, you know, pantyhose on the belt, you know, the fan belt or whatever you had to do to get by, right? And so I understand that mentality. So, but that
does make sense though, because this is not the first time their ability overall to adapt is not the first time I've heard this. You know?
Yeah, and sometimes you don't get an appreciation for that until you can go there and look. You
go there and see it or feel it. Yeah.
But flow is never about technique. You know, there's certain concepts you can. What I loved about the way Shelley taught me in general, he taught me concept based, and this is how I teach in general too. When I teach FMA, is that there's only about eight concepts total, right? You know, you can make them a little bit more or less depending on how you want to address it, right? But every technique flows off a concept or an idea. If you understand that concept, then it makes things very, very easy. It's not a technique anymore. The techniques are just a foundation, you know. And it's hard to explain it that. And people, when I tell people, oh, it's concept based, everybody goes, oh yeah, and they think they understand what I'm talking about, and honestly, they don't. You know, until I give them examples. You know, but I'll give you one example. Grab a stick. I'll give you a simple example of this. You know, if you don't mind.
No, please do.
Mm-hmm. So we have a thing called police techniques, right? In our system in general, and most people do have some kind of technique. Grab where it's right here, right?
Lower myself?
Huh?
Want me to lower myself?
No, you can. It doesn't matter. You can for just a second.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, folks, hold on. I'm going to lower you guys. I'll get a better picture.
Okay. So he just hold on to it right here. But this basic push and pull, you learn how to do it from either hand, right? And we learn the soft police techniques. Same thing if you start learning these kind of techniques, you know, or whatever. We learn this basic thing first, and it's just a push pull, right? So if you too far away, I'm too far off of it, right? This isn't going to work because the leverage is wrong, right? So I have to place my hand again and do a push pull. And then we start learning from different places how to do the push pull, you know, from different places. And that's a concept. It's an easy concept that I can teach people. They can play with it. Well, what happens is that when I was learning other martial arts, my student would grab me. I teach, everybody knows this, and that big number 5, right? And they pull away, you know, and I get really good at that. You know, it doesn't say anything about the guy punching me with this other hand, right? But I get really good at that. But the concept's still there. It's still that push pull, right? Then he grabs me with the other hand, and this doesn't work anymore. So I have to do the other way, right? Everybody knows this. I'm not going to get too complicated with it. It's a simple technique. It's opposite. So now I have 2 techniques. I have one going counterclockwise. I have one going clockwise. You know, then he grabs me with 2 hands. This doesn't work anymore. This doesn't work anymore, but going through the center does. But I have 3 techniques when all I needed was one idea, right? All I needed was one idea. So now it doesn't matter if I have a weapon in my hand or whatever. It's that constant knowing how to get that concept, right? Playing with that concept. And the same idea, if the punch comes, I can still apply that concept. But that's a concept that I tell my students to go home. You can pull yourself back up now, Dean. That's a concept where I play with that. I tell them play with that a million different ways. That's what I mean by the concept. Now I can make a framework of drills, 100 drills, 1,000 drills, whatever, but it's the idea. So when somebody grabs you, what happens is most people go, let me understand the technique that I learned in 2008, you know, and this technique 2 or technique 6 or whatever it is. And I don't have to remember technique for left or right or whatever. I just need to understand the concept, which is push pull. And that push pulls in everything. Does that make sense? Right. So that's what I mean by concept in its simplest form. So the same thing about swords. Every sword moves with a basic motion. So if you understand how that sword moves, you understand the concepts that can be applied with that sword, and then you can learn how to how that sword moves in general, right? So I can pick up any weapon and kind of figure out now why it moves right. We talked about this before off camera. We grab certain weapons, newer weapons, that it doesn't feel right. Right.
Yes. Right. The weight,
we had that conversation,
the
right?
balance. Yeah.
And people will go like, "Oh, this is a beautiful weapon. It's it's sharp. It's beautiful and all this kind of stuff." But when we grab it, we're like, "No, it's wrong." I say wrong, but just feels wrong. It feels unbalanced, But I wouldn't know that if I didn't have these swords in the played with these antiques. I wouldn't know that.
I just find it fascinating. I mean, like just listening to you expand on this stuff, and especially the mystical stuff. I just find that just so neat.
That can go really deep, really crazy. me and
yeah. I'm hoping
on that.
I'm hoping we see each other again at Chad's camp. I definitely, we got to, where we can talk more on this, and maybe you'll bring some of your goodies or whatever. Or short.
Yeah, you come by to the house and hang out with us. We're not very far wherever Chad has his camp typically.
You're not that far from there?
It depends where he has it at. Last time we were on 30 minutes away, maybe 45 minutes.
All right, yeah, okay.
If you don't get in an accident.
If I don't get in an accident, I got an accident last time I was on the way.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah, I haven't done. He hasn't
said anything about when his next camp is, but
yeah, he didn't mention. Yeah, I'm not sure if he mentioned he was having. Yeah, I'm sure time will tell. But yeah, that would be if you're that close, that would be neat for sure.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been awesome. See, it was a good call to split it in two.
Yeah, it was. And I'll play one more thing about the concepts when I think about KI.
Go ahead.
Is that so many people can do drills of KI, but they don't know when to do the move, the particular move, right? And that's one thing you get from Coach. Like last time I was with Coach in Manila, he was talking about differences from one angle, how they angle certain things. Do you do a ferrete? Do you do, a cruzada? Whenever that kind of stuff happens, right? And you won't get that out of the drills necessarily, but when you start, everything matters. So sometimes people get caught up in the drill of a technique, not understanding why they do a technique the way they do it, right? So it's always why are you doing what you're doing? Is important, and not just a drill, because there's so many things that we can do fast, but who cares? Who cares if it's fast? If you don't understand why you're doing it.
Yeah, or being in the right time in the right place.
Yeah, and that's why online, like Coach does online constantly, right? And that's great to get you started, but you eventually got to touch hands with them or somebody.
Yeah, with everything.
Yeah. Vico's a great source too. Absolutely. Vico's, like I said, I met Vico in 2015, I think, when I brought Coach and Peachy over to, he flew on his own down in Colorado, and we just hit it on, right? And how can you not? We talked about this before. How can you not with Vico? And Vico's been just a great friend ever since. He's such a great person.
Hopefully you'll be seeing him pretty soon, either in San Diego or Charlotte.
And he's a great resource because he has both the Rickett side and the.
And I know.
So he's a great resource because typically you have one flavor or the other.
Yeah, no, that's nice. I definitely get kind of both from him.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'm going to miss somebody, I'm sure, but you have Baste up in Atlanta now.
Baste's. Yes, right. He relocated there.
Yeah, he's in Atlanta now. He's a good resource. You got Alex. He's in San Francisco. He's a great resource. As far as the Jago side, you got Tony. I'm Tom. Sorry, that's in Vancouver. He's the head of the system. You've got him up there. So you've got plenty of resources if you want to learn KI. You got me down here in Florida. So there's plenty of resources to go.
I tell you, 15 years ago, man, it was zero.
I know.
It was like nothing. And trust me, I was trying to find wherever I could. It just, it was so depressing.
Yeah.
But we're still, I think it's kind of a good thing.
Yeah,
minority,
it is.
Though. Minority.
Some period in art, but you got to keep it spreading.
Yeah, keep it spreading. But I would never want to see it like, and nothing against these arts, and I hope people don't take this wrong way, but I would never want to see it get as big as like, Minor Niece or Dulce
Mhm.
Paris, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean. I think it's special, and
Yeah, yeah. It has definitely a mystique to it, you know.
Yeah.
So
I don't think but all right. Well, I appreciate you
you're welcome.
coming back on and doing two parts.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh my God, no, I'm so glad I did. This is better than I mean, this is better than I thought, particularly on the sword stuff. Oh my God. Oh, June. Okay, so June's not saying anything perverted. I mean, inappropriate.
Yeah. You're welcome. Like I said,
And that's Caleb. So thank you, Caleb. Is he still there?
Glad to be here.
yeah, Caleb's still here. Yeah, he's still
Okay.
here.
He can come in the camera. No big deal.
Yeah, he's shy.
All right. All right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you guys. Like I said, happy to share what I did. I try to not go too deep with the sword terminology and everything, but I see different swords.
Incredibly informative. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I learned a lot. Thick, whole, and deep.
Yeah.
So we went from a rated G version to
yeah
PG-13 maybe.
That's why I love going to Philippines with June. I love hanging out with June in general. It was always a lot of fun. We get up all together. And the stories we could tell you that we're not going to tell you.
No, I know. Well, June, if it's so awesome, that means you're coming on, right?
Yeah. June needs to come on next.
Yeah. And Chad had to catch the definitely catch the replay. Oh, he's on now. We can ask Chad. Are you having your camp same place last year? If you're still on, but all right. All right, folks. But again, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it will be. Hopefully, this won't obviously be the last time we talk.
No.
Before you know, February is going to be. When is June coming to Florida? There. All right. Well, you guys take care, and hopefully we'll talk before February. I hope at least.
Yeah.
So when you got you bringing any? Are you doing? You got anything going on between now and then?
We're still working on. We're trying to get Arnold here eventually. We would have had him here if COVID didn't happen. We would have had him here, but we're working on that. We have our camp up in Shelley Mills Power Camp in
Kansas.
End of this month in Kansas.
Okay.
I will probably do something. I typically do something in the winter. I'll bring somebody over, Alex or Shelley, or maybe
So
Arnold.
do you do that before, like pre-February or post-February?
Probably free. We try in Florida. We try to do things when it's not summer. And so Chad has his camp. Cayenne does his stuff. Around that February, March, January time frame.
Oh, he says I will let you know camp soon. Okay.
Yeah. So we try to work around all that, so we don't get too much stuff happening. So maybe around November, December, I'll have somebody come out.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure I'll see it, but definitely let me know. Yeah, please. Yeah. I only has like 3 months. All right, well, you guys take care. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
You too.
All right, appreciate you.
All right, same here.
Yeah.
Wow, that was a great episode, man. I learned a lot. Swords, mystical. All right, so who is next? That's a great question that I don't have the answer to. I believe, though, possibly I wanted to start getting some folks from Central America, and I believe Lalo, Dulce Paris guy, I think he's coming on, Tuesday, and then the 23rd, Michel Pascal from France. That should be pretty interesting. We have Hyle Campbell. He's going to be on. Supposed to be here talking to Vincent Cabalas. He might be coming on. And who else? I think that's it. A few others, but yeah. Anyway, don't forget, raffle for Jesse. All his equipment got stolen. $10 a ticket. It's pinned. FMA discussion. Okay. And the drawing is Sunday, the 31st, if I'm not mistaken, last day in July. Let me just make sure I'm correct. Yes, 31st, Sunday. I mean, usually we do them around 6 or 7 p.m. But again, $10 a ticket's going for a great cause, so. All right, folks, thank you for those who jumped in and commented, and we'll see you guys next time.